Ted Cruz joins us now, Republican Senator from Texas. Senator, always good to have you on the program. I appreciate it. There's been some reaction on Capitol Hill today to the resignation of Joe Kent, top counterterrorism official within the administration. What's yours?
Well, listen, if any official in the administration disagrees with the national security policies of the president, he or she should resign. And Mr. Kent apparently vigorously disagreed with the president's decision. I think President Trump was exactly right to act to protect America and protect America from the threats posed by Iran. The reason President Trump launched this military attack on Iran is because for 47 years, Iran has been the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. The Iranian regime has killed nearly 1,000 Americans. They provided over 90% of the funding to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and the Ayatollah, who is no longer with us, not once but twice, hired hitmen to try to murder President Trump. And so President Trump, as commander-in-chief, made the resolute decision to act to protect Americans, to keep Americans safer. Mr. Kent apparently disagreed with that, and so if that's the case, resignation was the right course of action.
Senator, as you well know, Kent's resignation letter touched on something that has created some divisions within the MAGA or America First movement, that Israel inordinately either pressured or talked the president into this conflict. I'd like you to evaluate that.
So I actually think there are very few divisions. There are a few loudmouth commentators. There are people like Tucker Carlson, who has become the most rabidly anti-Israel commentator, ostensibly on the right. He also has become one of the leading defenders of Iran. He has been a vocal defender of Islamists. He has defended Hamas, said he didn't think they were a terrorist organization. Tucker Carlson has suggested we should apologize to the family of Osama bin Laden. I think those are extreme positions. That is not where Republicans are. That is not where conservatives are. Republicans are overwhelmingly standing with President Trump. And just because Tucker Carlson and a handful of other mouthpieces online decide to embrace a radical isolationist view that is deeply anti-Israel and that is an apologist for radical Islamists, it doesn't mean that's where the voters are. I think the voters, and the polling shows this, at least on the Republican side of the aisle, are overwhelmingly, nearly 90%, standing with President Trump because he's acting boldly to keep America safe.
Do you want to name check anyone else on that side, in addition to Tucker Carlson?
Oh, listen, there are plenty. Tucker, I think, has been the most vocal. He's been the most harmful. I said last week, I think Tucker Carlson is the most dangerous demagogue in America. And I do think the poison they're spreading, it is getting some purchase with young people, with teenagers and 20-somethings. And I think it is an obligation of all of us to stand up and speak out. Look, I've also been vocal that I'm concerned about efforts to divide faithful Catholics from evangelical Christians, Protestants. I think that Catholics and Protestants standing together has been really the foundation of the conservative movements for many decades. And those who are seeking to sow dissension are really, their ultimate end is to see the Democrats win, to see the conservative coalition fractured. That'd be tragic for America. I don't think it's going to happen. And I think those who are spending money trying to make that happen are very likely enemies of the United States, are nations like Qatar and China and Russia and others, I think, that are spending real money trying to damage America. But I think America is a lot stronger than a bunch of bots online.
And, Senator, I'm going to get into the SAVE Act and a couple of other issues, but one last thing on Iran. You might have heard Charlie D'Agata talking about two other significant people within the Iranian regime eliminated. That's the Israeli term. War is a blunt instrument, so let me ask you a blunt question. Can the U.S. and Israel, in tandem or separately, kill their way to regime change?
Look, I believe the objective here should be to collapse this regime. Why? Because this regime has been waging war with America for 47 years. As I said, they've killed nearly 1,000 Americans, and they are actively spending money. The Biden administration flowed over $100 billion to the Ayatollah, who would lead mobs chanting death to America. That made no sense. President Trump is taking a very simple position, which is if you are killing Americans, if you continue trying to kill Americans, the commander-in-chief is going to act to stop you. Now, we are not going to see a scenario where we see hundreds of thousands of American troops on the ground for an extended period of time. Iran is not Iraq. However, if we see this regime fall, if we see Iran have a government that is no longer led by a radical Islamist who wants to murder Americans and is actively murdering Americans, that will be a dramatic national security improvement for the United States. And I think that's why the president is acting. I think that's also why Israel is acting. Both are acting in their self-defense.
Is that worth boots on the ground?
The president has made clear that we're not going to see extended boots on the ground. I could envision an operation, perhaps something like what we saw in Venezuela, where there was Delta Force went in a 2-hour incursion, took on opposing fire, took out about 100 Cuban soldiers and apprehended Maduro and his wife, brought him back for federal charges and prosecution for being a narco-terrorist. By the way, that likewise made America much safer. I could envision limited boots on the ground for a specific objective, but I think the chance of anything like an extended occupation, the chances of that are zero.
Let's talk about what's before the Senate right now, the so-called Save America Act.
Yeah.
If enacted, it would require a birth certificate or a passport. Why not have a driver's license, which is a much more common, much more universal form of identification to meet this standard?
Well, because particularly Democrat states give driver's licenses to illegal aliens. And the Save America Act has 2 requirements, both of which are simple common sense. One, you have to demonstrate American citizenship to register to vote. That's just the first time. And 2, when you show up to vote, you have to have a photo ID. Now, Major, the overwhelming majority of Americans support those common sense provisions. Let's take photo ID. 81% of Americans support requiring a photo ID to vote. Interestingly, 75% of African Americans support requiring a photo ID to vote. Over 80% of Hispanics support requiring a photo ID to vote. And here's an amazing statistic. 70% of Democrats nationwide support requiring a photo ID to vote. So why are the Democrats doing everything they can to stop the Save America Act? And I believe the reason is they want illegal aliens who are here to vote illegally. We saw Joe Biden open our borders and allow 12 million illegal immigrants to flood into this country. And we are seeing the Senate Democrats, everyone but John Fetterman, line up and say they will die on the battle lines to prevent basic common sense election integrity legislation. I think that's unfortunate, and I think it's bad for democracy and bad for America.
One last thing on this legislation, Senator. It would also dramatically scale back mail-in voting. 28 states use no-excuse mail-in balloting. 8 states ballot that way entirely. Many red states use no-excuse mail-in balloting. No one's clamoring for that. Why is that in there?
Let me tell you where I think the abuses are. We see blue states, states like California, that send out unsolicited mail-in ballots. They just mail ballots to everybody, and you end up having people who aren't there, people who are dead, getting mail-in ballots, and that invites voter fraud. I think we should ban unsolicited mail-in ballots. I also think we should ban ballot harvesting, which is the corrupt practice we see in states like California. Ballot harvesting is where a political operative handles the ballot of another voter, and it invites voter fraud. And by the way, let's say you're listening and you think, well, this is a partisan issue, so maybe you don't believe me because I'm a Republican. If you don't believe me, then perhaps you would believe President Jimmy Carter. Because President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker joined together in a bipartisan examination of voter fraud. A national commission, it was called the Carter-Baker Commission. Jimmy Carter obviously was a Democrat president of the United States. And the Carter-Baker Commission concluded voter fraud is real. They concluded that mail-in voting exacerbates voter fraud. They recommended photo ID to vote. and they pointed to ballot harvesting as the single worst practice for encouraging voter fraud. Sadly, the Democrats, it's almost as if they went down every recommendation of the Carter-Baker Commission and said, how do you reduce voter fraud? Let's reverse it and do more of that to get more voter fraud. That's why they oppose the Save America Act.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas. I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.